We are here at the UBS Australasia conference in Sydney on day one and really excited about this conversation coming up. Joining me now is Michael Rogers, who's a senior advisor at Bondi Partners. He's also the former commander of US Cyber Command and the National Security Agency director. And as we were just chatting about in the break, nothing going on, nothing pertinent to your wealth of experience at all. We jest, but let me get your reaction to the election results, and what do you think, having worked under both Presidents Obama and President Trump, what do you think Trump 2.0 is going to look like in terms of his approach to security and cybersecurity?
So clearly, President Trump won by a clear majority. Not a landslide, but still a clear majority, 51% or so of the popular vote. I think what the election shows, particularly in his mind, is he now has a mandate for change, that his election is a result of broad dissatisfaction, not universal, but broad dissatisfaction with the policies of the Biden administration. And I suspect President Trump's view is I now have a mandate to change, and I will do that. He'll probably focus, as he's indicated so far, economic lines. He clearly has a different vision, trade, tariff policy. His view is prices have gotten out of control in the U.S. He wants to change that. He clearly articulated concerns about, hey, we got to get tougher on the border. We've got to control the flow of illegal immigration. I suspect that's going to be a priority. And then he has also said, hey, the world more broadly outside the United States, it's in a worse situation than it was when I left, and I'm going to try what I can do to address those issues, whether it's Ukraine, China, Israel, and the Middle East. So no small amount of challenges and all that.
No small amount, and he's been quite hawkish in terms of indicating that he'd take a harder line on Iran and China, for example. And the security risks are so complex. In his last term, there were worries about President Trump at that point wanting to put in place his supporters at the top of the CIA, for example, and other intelligence agencies. Do you worry about the politicization over competence, perhaps, for these agencies?
So, look, I was one of those individuals. I'm in the Mueller report because twice he asked me to do something, and I told him I wasn't going to do that because I didn't think it was appropriate. I told him why, and to his credit, he said, okay, Mike, I understand. So my view is if everyone does their job, we're going to be fine. We have a series of protections, checks and balances in the U.S. system, and trying to make fundamental change is not impossible, but it's really difficult. Now, clearly, I think when President Trump, starts this term on the 20th of January, 2025, number one, he'll have already been the president for 4 years, so he's got a steep learning curve behind him. I think he'll be very focused on, I've got experience here, I know exactly what I want to do. Secondly, he truly believes this, in his mind, this idea that parts of the government are resisting him, that don't want to follow his direction. I always try to tell him, sir, we're all professionals. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we serve professionally whoever is the duly elected leader of the United States. But I think he'll be inclined to make sure that his supporters are spread across a much greater spectrum of leadership within the government, not just at the cabinet level, but below that as well. That will be a difference, I think, from the first time where he just didn't have the time really to do that as much. I think he'll start out. That'll be important to him this time around.
What was it like working for him? Because you've spoken about in the past this idea of access and that being a bit of a risk to President Trump, right? In the sense that, he wasn't a man for consensus or necessarily sort of research, but he liked to have these conversations. Right, and it often depended on the last person that had access to him.
So to his credit, he would often say to you, look, I'm a business individual. I'm not a politician. So I'm not interested in the 25 years of history on this issue. What I want to understand is, what's the problem? Why are we here today? And what do you want from me? What is the recommendation you're making? Now, part of the challenge with him began, he tended to be a person who tended great store by the last person he spoke to. So it's interesting to watch the people around him try to make sure they were the last person that he spoke to. Others have commented on this. It's not unique to Mike Rogers and my impression, having worked with him for 2.5 years. On the other hand, I do believe that there'll be a system in place around him that he'll be able to hear a broad range of views. Now, which he decides he wants to pay the most attention to, look, as in any president, that's going to be up to him. So, the other thing I think we need to remember is, number one, he thought being unpredictable was a great strength, was an advantage. He actually liked being perceived as unpredictable. So we got to remember that. And secondly, he's an individual who liked generating a response. Many politicians, in my experience, I'm not a political individual, but having worked with many of the leaders in my government, their view is, hey, look, let's not do things that say things that are going to spark turbulence, that are going to generate a lot of banks. He's very different in that regard. His view is, hey, I like generating a response. He almost enjoyed it, I thought, my perception was. And so I tell people, look, you're going to have to get used to the idea that what he says and what he ultimately chooses to do may not be the same thing.
Which would be comforting to some people, right? Do you see the risks to national security as being the same, perhaps exacerbated, than they were 4 years ago? You've spoken, of course, about misinformation and what's happening online. What is the biggest sort of risks for you?
So the security environment clearly has gotten worse or tougher on a global basis. I mean, we're now dealing with conflict in the Middle East in multiple dimensions, both activity directed against economic things like shipping in the Red Sea, from Iran and Israel to directly exchanging, attacks against each other, as well as the ongoing conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon, none of which to me appears if they're going to end anytime in the immediate, like the next few weeks or months. So the world's gotten a lot more contentious, a lot more complicated, technology and information playing an ever greater role. And you're watching how more and more nations, China, Russia, Iran, are using the power of disinformation, of misinformation, deep fakes, the role of technology to make us believe that what we are seeing, what we are reading is real or accurate, when in fact it's not. It is created out of, it's not real. It's some person's attempt to technically try to convince us it's real. The information dynamic, I think, is one of our biggest challenges, particularly in free democratic societies, where the ability to express our opinion is so foundational, and the idea that, well, the government doesn't censor. We allow people to read, view, consider, and they will make their choice. That becomes increasingly difficult when we've got nation states and individuals, trying to use those technologies and those freedoms against us, as it were.
Is deregulation, which is what we're looking at with a second Trump administration, going to potentially make that worse?
I don't know. I think it varies by the specific situation we're dealing with. And I also, before we start making blanket assumptions about he's going to do this, he's going to do that, let's wait and see. On the First Amendment, I don't know what the answer is, but I just caution us against making a lot of blanket assumptions this early.
You're here in Sydney, and I do wonder, to kind of end this conversation, what do you see the risks, the challenges are for middle nations like Australia?
Well, first of all, we all, regardless of size, we all live in this hyper-connected world. Our economies are all intertwined. Our relationships, our friendships, you look at AUKUS, you look at the great history our two nations, the United States and Australia, have together.
Yeah.
So the thing I always would say to my Australian teammates is, look, you're a great nation with a great history. One of the things that makes you great, you're a democratic society that's willing to do hard things. I have great respect for countries like that. The self-image of America is we're like that. We're willing to do hard things. We're willing to do the things that we think are right.